Hey guys, it's Miss Hamilton. I wanted to go ahead and read aloud your pretest for you, questions and answers. We'll start right here if you're looking at my screen. Please make sure to read the Newsella article titled A Short History of the U.S. Government's Relationship with Native Americans. There is an extra copy of this article posted on the Google Classroom under Week 2's work. You may use this article while you take the pretest. The first question: why did treaty making end? Congress could not understand the language Native Americans used, so they could no longer communicate. Congress would not treat Native Americans fairly and did not identify or respect them as capable of making treaties. The treaties had too many problems. The U.S. government was frustrated that Native Americans would side with the British. Based on that question 2 says, give one piece of evidence to support your above answer. Occasionally, the Supreme Court is called upon to interpret them. One treaty with ongoing consequences is the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868. Treaty making ended in 1871 when Congress ceased to recognize the tribes as groups capable of making treaties. Many Native American tribes allied with the British during the Revolutionary War. Which section from the article best explains why the U.S. government split tribal lands into smaller pieces? Introduction, paragraphs 1 through 4. Supreme Court rules against tribal sovereignty. Custer's last stand. Trail of Tears. Select the paragraph from the article's introduction, paragraph 1 through 4, that explains how the U.S. government conducted business with Native American tribes. Relations between Native Americans and the U.S. government have been tense. To many Native Americans, the history begins with the uneasy welcoming of the first European settlers, which was followed by times of opposition, defeat, and near extinction. To Americans, the history includes both treating Native American tribes as equals and exiling them from their homes. Often, these efforts happened at the same time. Many Native American tribes allied with the British during the Revolutionary War. However, the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war, was silent on the fates of these British allies. The new U.S. government was thus free to acquire Native American lands by treaty or force. Resistance from the tribes stopped the encroachment of the settlers, at least for a while. On occasion, the representatives of Native American tribes who signed the treaties were not authorized under tribal law to do so. For example, William McIntosh, chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation, signed the Treaty of Indian Springs in violation of tribal law. The 1825 treaty ceded virtually all of the tribe's land in the state of Georgia. McIntosh was later assassinated. After the Revolutionary War, the United States maintained the British policy of making treaties with Native American tribes. In general, the treaties defined the boundaries of Native American lands. They also stated how much the government would pay the tribes for taking their land. Casinos can now operate on U.S. reservations. Which piece of evidence best describes the framework that makes this possible? In 1987, the Supreme Court determined that states cannot regulate Native American gaming enterprises. After World War II, however, proposals arose in favor of termination of tribes and an end to reservations. In it, the United States pledged that the Great Sioux Reservation would be set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the tribe. A new approach was undertaken with the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. The law ended allotment and banned the sale of Native American land and returned some lands to the tribes. Which statement would be most important to include in a summary of the article? The U.S. government forcibly removed several Native American tribes from their land during the Trail of Tears. Over 50 years after their land was stolen from them, the Sioux were awarded a legal victory but still have not been granted their land back. Many Native American tribes supported the British against the Americans during the Revolutionary War. A Supreme Court decision allowed Native American tribes to open and operate casinos on tribal land. Which statement is a central idea of the article? The U.S. government used legally binding treaties to work with the Native American tribes. Native Americans have historically been treated badly by the U.S. government. The U.S. government has been consistent about protecting Native American tribes. Native Americans lost several battles to the U.S. government. Which sentence from the article shows the Sioux's main problem? In it, the United States pledged that the Great Sioux Reservation would be for the undisturbed use of the tribe. The land included the Black Hills, a small mountain range in western South Dakota that is sacred to the Sioux. The court ruled that the government owed the Sioux a reasonable price for the land plus interest. As of 2018, the amount due is around $1 billion. The tribe has rejected the money, however, because it is still seeking return of the land. Which sentence explains why the Sioux tribe and the U.S. fought the Black Hills War? One is the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868, which was signed by the U.S. government and the Sioux Nation. When gold was discovered in the Black Hills, the United States tried to buy back the land. Custer and his men were killed, and later the battle became known as Custer's Last Stand. The United States continued its battle against the Sioux until reclaiming the Black Hills in 1877. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which allowed the government to remove Native Americans from their tribal land and settle them elsewhere. The main targets were tribes in the southeast, such as the Cherokee and the Sioux. Resettlement was supposed to be voluntary. However, it turned out not to be. Thousands of Native Americans were forced from their homes and sent west of the Mississippi River. The forced relocation became known as the Trail of Tears. Which statement summarizes the paragraph? The Indian Removal Act allowed Congress to buy tribal land. The government forced many tribes to leave their lands and move west. Congress wanted to take tribal land west of the Mississippi River. The Trail of Tears was a voluntary relocation of the Cherokee tribe. This next shows an image. You will need to read the image to answer the following questions. According to image 1, how soon could someone possess or own Native American land? Right away, 30 days, 6 months, or after the war? Which heading from the text of image 1 goes best based on the main idea of each heading's section? Supreme Court rules against tribal sovereignty. Custer's Last Stand. Trail of Tears. Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975. How does the information in image 1 best go with the ideas presented in the article? It shows that U.S. government appreciated the Native Americans' fine land. It gives an example of the General Allotment Act of 1887, which allowed the government to divide the Native Americans' land and sell it. It shows you an example of the cost of land and inflation. Or it was an advertisement meant to convince Native Americans to buy back their own land. Image 2, General William T. Sherman, third from center, and commissioners in council with chiefs and headmen from the Sioux during a treaty made at Fort Laramie, Wyoming in 1868. Image courtesy of the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration. Analyze image 2 and reflect on the content in the article. What does the image best reflect? It shows the reader that British and Native Americans were war allies. It shows readers that Native Americans in the United States tried to make treaties. It shows the reader how violent and the interactions were between the United States and the Native Americans. It shows that both sides were tired. Look at image 2 and the caption. Reskim each heading and the content presented. Which heading/content does the image go best with? Supreme Court rules against tribal sovereignty. Custer's last stand. Trail of Tears. Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975.